The gunshot from the saloon echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Victoria Thornton stepped off the stagecoach, her emerald eyes scanning the frontier town with equal parts hope and desperation. After 3 months of travel from Boston, she had finally reached the edge of civilization, clutching a bundle of love letters from a man who'd promised her the world. Victoria smoothed her travel-worn blue dress and adjusted her small hat, a garment that had once been fashionable in Boston but looked painfully out of place amid the practical attire of the Western women. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild enough to frighten a proper Eastern lady, but Victoria was no longer proper, nor was she afraid. "Excuse me," she called to the stagecoach driver who was unloading trunks. "Could you direct me to the residence of Mr. Daniel McCormick?" The driver, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard, stopped his work and turned to her with a puzzled expression. "McCormick? Can't say I know any McCormick round these parts, madam. But he must be here," Victoria insisted, reaching into her reticule to extract a folded letter. "He wrote to me extensively about his ranch just outside of Willow Creek, Arizona Territory. He described it in great detail." The driver shook his head. "Been running this route for 15 years, madam. Never heard of any McCormick ranch." Victoria's heart dropped, but her stubborn chin lifted. "Perhaps he's new to the area. I shall inquire at the hotel." As Victoria gathered her smaller bags, leaving the larger trunk for later retrieval, she couldn't help but notice the stares from locals lounging on the boardwalk. She had come so far, leaving behind her family's disapproval, selling her mother's jewelry to finance the journey, and enduring weeks of uncomfortable travel. All for a man whose letters had painted a picture of devotion so compelling that she'd agreed to be his wife without ever having met him face to face. The Willow Creek Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days, but it offered respite from the blistering Arizona sun. Inside, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun stood behind the front desk. "I'd like a room, please," Victoria said, placing her handbag on the counter. "And information about a local rancher, Daniel McCormick." The woman's eyes, initially businesslike, softened with something that looked disconcertingly like pity. "Room's $2 a night. As for McCormick," she hesitated. "Honey, you wouldn't be the first to ask after him." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "There's no Daniel McCormick in these parts. Never has been." The woman leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You got letters, I suppose. Promises of marriage to a successful rancher." Victoria couldn't speak, could only nod as the terrible truth began to dawn on her. "It's a cruel scam, miss. Some snake's been writing to Eastern women for years, describing a life out here that don't exist. Gets them to send money for the trip, then vanishes like morning mist." The room seemed to tilt sideways as Victoria gripped the edge of the counter, but he never asked for money. "I financed the journey myself." The hotel keeper looked surprised. "Well, that's a new twist. Usually they ask for travel funds or investment in the ranch." Victoria thought of the months of correspondence, the gradual revelation of hearts, the promises exchanged. Had it all been a lie? She had left everything behind: her teaching position, her small circle of friends, the security of her parents' home, all based on words written by a phantom. "I have nowhere to go," Victoria whispered, more to herself than to the woman. "You can stay here while you figure things out," the hotel keeper offered. "I'm Martha Wilson." "And you are?" "Victoria Thornton," she replied automatically, her mind still reeling from the revelation. "Well, Miss Thornton, Willow Creek might not have your fictional rancher, but it's not the worst place to land. We've got a schoolhouse that's been without a teacher for months. If you're qualified, the town might be willing to hire you." Victoria nodded absently. Teaching had been her profession in Boston, but she hadn't come west to stand in front of a chalkboard. She'd come for love, for adventure, for a new life with a man who'd written poetry about her eyes after she'd sent him a daguerreotype. After settling into her room, Victoria sat on the narrow bed and spread the letters across the quilt. Each one was written in the same steady hand, describing the rolling grasslands of the McCormick Ranch, the herd of prime cattle, the comfortable house he'd built with his own hands. He'd written of loneliness, of wanting a refined Eastern woman to share his life, of how her letters had brought light to his solitary existence. Tears blurred Victoria's vision as she gathered the letters and moved to the window. Outside, the main street of Willow Creek bustled with afternoon activity, cowboys lounging outside the saloon, merchants sweeping their storefronts, women carrying parcels from the general store. This was to have been her home, these people her neighbors. Now they were strangers in a strange land that had no place for her. A commotion near the livery stable caught her eye. A man on horseback had arrived, his stallion rearing dramatically before settling. Even from her window, Victoria could see that he cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle, then turned to speak with the stable boy. Something about his presence made Victoria pause in her grief. There was a solidity to him, a realness that contrasted sharply with the fantasy man whose letters she'd been clutching. This was a man of flesh and blood, not ink and paper. As if sensing her scrutiny, he looked up toward her window. Victoria stepped back quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring. She returned to the bed and began to fold the letters, placing them back in her trunk. Self-pity would get her nowhere. She needed a plan. If she was stranded in Willow Creek, she would make the best of it. Tomorrow, she would inquire about the teaching position. She would find lodgings more permanent than the hotel. She would write to her parents, swallowing her pride to tell them she had been duped, but was safe and establishing herself in the West regardless. As Victoria washed her face and changed for dinner, she tried to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. She had come all this way for a man who never existed. Now she would have to find the strength to build a life without him. The hotel's small dining room was nearly empty when Victoria came downstairs, save for a few traveling salesmen and the dark-haired man she'd seen from her window. He sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, eyes constantly surveying the room, a habit Victoria had read was common among men who lived dangerous lives in the West. Martha Wilson appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of food. "Evening, Miss Thornton. Hungry?" "Yes, thank you," Victoria replied, trying to appear more composed than she felt. "Sit anywhere you like. We've got beef stew tonight, fresh bread, and apple pie if you've got room for it." Victoria nodded her thanks and chose a table as far from the other diners as possible. She wasn't in the mood for conversation. But as she settled into her chair, she felt eyes upon her and looked up to find the dark-haired man watching her with undisguised interest. When their eyes met, he didn't look away as propriety might have dictated. Instead, he nodded politely, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. Victoria returned the nod stiffly before focusing intently on smoothing her napkin across her lap. Martha brought her a bowl of stew that smelled wonderfully rich after weeks of bland stagecoach stop food. As Victoria ate, she couldn't help but notice the dark-haired stranger continued to cast glances in her direction. It wasn't the lecherous stare she'd endured from some men during her journey west, but something more measured, almost respectful. When she'd finished her meal, Victoria was gathering her courage to head to her room when the man rose from his table and approached her. Up close, he was even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by physical labor rather than a tailor's padding. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Pardon the intrusion, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with a slight wave. "I couldn't help but notice you're new to town, Nathan Foster." He extended a calloused hand, then seemed to think better of it, giving a slight bow instead. Victoria hesitated, but her Boston manners prevailed. "Victoria Thornton, Miss Thornton," he nodded. "Welcome to Willow Creek, first time in the West, is it that obvious?" She asked, unable to keep a note of defensiveness from her voice. A smile flickered across his face. "Only in the best ways, madam. You bring a touch of civilization that's sorely needed out here." He gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" Victoria should have refused. A proper lady wouldn't entertain conversation with a strange man, especially not in the West where reputations were as fragile as desert flowers. But nothing about her situation was proper anymore. and something in Nathan Foster's straightforward gaze made her nod. "Are you passing through or planning to stay?" he asked as he settled his large frame into the chair. Victoria considered how to answer. The truth was humiliating, but lies had brought her nothing but grief. "I came to marry a man who, it seems, doesn't exist." She expected surprise, perhaps mockery. Instead, Nathan Foster's expression darkened with anger that wasn't directed at her. "The McCormick scam," Victoria's eyes widened. "You know of it. Everyone in 3 territories knows about it, been going on for years." He shook his head. "Sheriff's never been able to catch whoever's behind it. The letters come from different towns, always moving." "I see." Victoria looked down at her empty plate. "Well, now I know as well. What will you do now?" His voice was gentle, lacking the pity she'd heard from Martha Wilson. "I'm a teacher by training. Mrs. Wilson mentioned the town needs one." Nathan nodded. "Desperately. Our last teacher left after a rattlesnake found its way into the schoolhouse." Seeing her alarmed expression, he quickly added, "No one was hurt. She just decided Arizona wasn't to her liking." "I'm not easily frightened by wildlife, Mr. Foster," Victoria said with more confidence than she felt. "Though I admit I've never encountered a rattlesnake. Good policy is to give them plenty of space," he said with a smile that transformed his face, creating deep dimples in his cheeks. Much like some of the human residents around here, Victoria found herself smiling in return. "I'll bear that in mind. The town council meets tomorrow afternoon. I serve on it, among other duties. If you're serious about the teaching position, I'd be happy to introduce you." "That's very kind," Victoria said, genuinely touched by the offer. "I would appreciate that greatly." Nathan studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "It takes courage to come all this way alone, Miss Thornton. Whatever his failings, your McCormick had good taste in women." Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He wasn't my McCormick, he wasn't anyone's, apparently." His loss. Nathan rose and replaced his hat. "I'll call for you at 2 o'clock tomorrow if that suits you." "It does. Thank you, Mr. Foster." As he walked away, Victoria found herself wondering what other duties he had mentioned. He didn't look like a shopkeeper or a banker. With his weathered appearance and the gun she'd noticed holstered at his hip, he seemed more like the cowboys she'd glimpsed outside the saloon. Yet there was something in his manner, a quiet authority, an educated way of speaking that set him apart. That night, Victoria slept fitfully, her dreams a confused jumble of faceless letter writers, stage coaches that never reached their destinations, and a pair of blue eyes watching her from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Morning brought clarity and renewed determination. Victoria unpacked her trunk, selecting her most conservative dress, a navy blue with a high collar and minimal trim. If she was to present herself as a potential teacher, she needed to look the part. She arranged her hair simply, pinning it at the nape of her neck, and allowed herself only the smallest touch of rosewater behind her ears. After a breakfast of eggs and surprisingly good coffee, Victoria set out to explore Willow Creek in the daylight. The town was larger than it had appeared from the stagecoach, stretching for several blocks with side streets branching off the main thoroughfare. In addition to the hotel, saloon, and livery stable, there was a general store, a small bank, a blacksmith shop, a church, and several other businesses. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small bell tower. Victoria approached it with professional interest, peering through the windows to see rows of rough-hewn desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. It was humble compared to the school where she'd taught in Boston, but it had the same feeling of possibility that all schoolrooms shared. "It needs a woman's touch," came a voice behind her. Victoria turned to find Nathan Foster, leading a magnificent black horse by the reins. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the strong line of his jaw covered with a day's growth of beard, the way his cotton shirt stretched across broad shoulders, the worn leather vest that had seen years of use. "Good morning, Mr. Foster," she said formally, trying not to notice how the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. "You're right, the schoolhouse could use some attention. The children too," he said, his expression serious. "There are about 20 of school age in town and from the surrounding ranches. Some haven't had proper schooling in over a year. Victoria felt a familiar tug of professional concern. That won't do at all. Children's minds develop too quickly to waste such time. Nathan smiled. You sound like a teacher already. I've been one since I was 18, Victoria admitted. 6 years in a Boston grammar school, his eyebrows raised. You're only 24, you seem. He trailed off, apparently thinking better of whatever he'd been about to say. More weathered after my journey, Victoria suggested with a small smile. More composed, he corrected. As if you know exactly who you are. The comment struck Victoria as ironic, considering how adrift she felt. Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Foster, he nodded thoughtfully. That they can, Miss Thornton. He gestured toward the main street. I have some business to attend to before the council meeting. Would you like to continue your exploration, or shall I escort you back to the hotel? I can find my way, thank you, Victoria said, not wanting to impose on his time. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. As she watched him lead his horse toward the livery stable, Victoria wondered again about Nathan Foster's position in Willow Creek. He was clearly respected, serving on the town council. Despite his relatively young age, she guessed him to be in his early 30s. Yet he didn't have the soft hands of a merchant or the flashy attire of a gambler. He moved like a man accustomed to open spaces and physical labor. The mystery of Nathan Foster occupied Victoria's thoughts as she continued her tour of Willow Creek. At the general store, she purchased a small notebook and pencil, thinking she might begin planning lessons if the council approved her appointment. New in town? Asked the storekeeper, a balding man with a friendly face. Yes, Victoria replied, bracing herself for the inevitable questions. Passing through or staying? I hope to secure the teaching position, Victoria said, deciding this was the simplest explanation. The man's face brightened. That'd be wonderful news. I've got 3 young'uns who have been running wild without proper schooling. I'm Benjamin Reed, by the way. Victoria Thornton, she replied, shaking his offered hand. Well, Miss Thornton, I hope the council hires you on the spot. My wife says the children in this town are growing as wild as tumbleweeds without a teacher to civilize them. Victoria smiled. I'll do my best to tame them if given the chance. As she paid for her purchases, Mr. Reed leaned in confidentially. I saw you talking with Nathan Foster earlier. He's a good man to have on your side. Best rancher in the territory and the closest thing to a law we've got around here. So that explained it. Foster was a rancher and apparently had some law enforcement role as well. Does Willow Creek not have a sheriff? Victoria asked. We did, till he took a bullet last month. Town's been looking for a replacement, but good men are hard to find. Meanwhile, Nathan's been helping keep the peace, along with his ranch duties. This new information made Victoria view her encounter with Nathan differently. No wonder he carried himself with such authority. He was essentially filling the role of sheriff along with running a ranch. By the time 2 o'clock arrived, Victoria had composed herself and prepared a brief outline of her qualifications and teaching philosophy. When Nathan knocked on her door, she was ready, clutching a small portfolio of reference letters she had fortunately brought with her. You look very professional, Miss Thornton, Nathan commented as they walked toward the town hall, a modest building next to the bank. Thank you, Mr. Foster. I want to make a good impression. You needn't worry. The council is desperate for a teacher, and after meeting you, I suspect they'll be impressed by more than just your qualifications. Victoria glanced at him, wondering if he was flirting with her, but his expression remained perfectly proper. I appreciate your confidence, Mr. Foster, but I prefer to be hired based on merit alone. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. As you should. I only meant that your obvious intelligence and determination will serve you well. Before Victoria could respond, they had reached the town hall. Inside, 4 men were already seated at a long table. Mr. Reed from the general store, an older gentleman in a banker's suit, a ruddy-faced man with an impressive mustache, and a thin man in a preacher's collar. Gentlemen, Nathan said as they entered, may I present Miss Victoria Thornton, formerly a teacher in Boston, who is interested in our vacant position. The men rose to greet her, and Victoria found herself the center of attention as introductions were made. The banker was Horace Williams, the mustached man was Dr. Samuel Griffin, and the preacher was Reverend Thomas Parker. Please, Miss Thornton, tell us about your experience, Mr. Williams invited after they were all seated. For the next hour, Victoria outlined her education at a women's normal school in Massachusetts. Her 6 years teaching grammar and composition to children aged 6 to 12, and her philosophy on education. The council asked thoughtful questions about discipline, curriculum, and how she might adapt to teaching children of varying ages and backgrounds in a single classroom. Some of our children have never set foot in a schoolhouse, Reverend Parker explained. Others were well educated before moving west. How would you manage such disparity? Victoria had anticipated this question. I would assess each child individually, grouping them by ability rather than age for certain subjects. More advanced students could assist in tutoring beginners, which reinforces their own knowledge while building community within the classroom. The council members exchanged approving glances. After a few more questions, Mr. Williams cleared his throat. Miss Thornton, would you mind stepping outside while we deliberate? Victoria nodded and left the room. Nathan followed her into the hallway. You impressed them, he said quietly. I hope so, Victoria replied. I find I very much want this position, not just for practical reasons, but because these children deserve an education. Nathan studied her with that same thoughtful expression she'd noticed the night before. You didn't come west for the adventure, did you? You genuinely believed in this McCormick fellow. Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. I believed in what he wrote in his letters, that two people could forge a meaningful connection through words alone, that the West offered opportunities for a fresh start, that a marriage could be based on mutual respect and shared dreams rather than social convenience. Those aren't foolish things to believe in, Nathan said softly. Before Victoria could respond, the door opened, and Mr. Williams beckoned them back inside. Miss Thornton, the council has voted unanimously to offer you the position of teacher for Willow Creek School, effective immediately. The salary is $40 per month, with accommodations provided in the small house behind the schoolhouse. Relief and gratification washed over Victoria. Thank you, gentlemen. I accept with pleasure and promise to serve the children of this community to the best of my ability. After discussing practical matters when school would begin, what supplies were available, how many students to expect, the meeting concluded. As Victoria and Nathan left the town hall, she couldn't contain her smile. Congratulations, Miss Thornton, Nathan said, his own smile creating those appealing dimples. Willow Creek just got considerably more civilized. Thank you for your help, Mr. Foster. I might not have had this opportunity without your introduction. You would have found your way, he said confidently. A woman determined enough to travel across the country alone isn't likely to be stopped by a little thing like not knowing the right people. His assessment warmed Victoria. Few people in her life had recognized her determination as a strength. Most saw it as an unfortunate trait in a woman who should be more pliant. Would you like to see your new home? Nathan asked, gesturing toward the schoolhouse in the distance. Very much, Victoria replied, eager to begin planning her new life. They walked companionably through town, nodding to people they passed. Victoria noticed that everyone greeted Nathan with evident respect, from the rough-looking cowboys outside the saloon to the well-dressed women emerging from the general store. The teacher's house behind the schoolhouse was small but sturdy, a one-room cabin with a covered porch, a stone fireplace, and windows that caught the afternoon light. Inside was simple furniture, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small dresser, and a bookshelf containing a Bible, a dictionary, and several well-worn novels. It's perfect, Victoria said, turning in a circle to take it all in. After the uncertainty of the past day, having a place of her own felt like a miracle. It needs a woman's touch, Nathan said, echoing his earlier comment about the schoolhouse. It needs a good cleaning first, Victoria replied practically, and then perhaps some curtains and a colorful quilt. Nathan chuckled. Practical and aesthetic, a rare combination. Victoria ran her hand along the rough wooden table. When can I move in? Right away, if you'd like. I can help bring your trunk from the hotel. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time. You must have ranch duties waiting, Nathan shrugged. My foreman can manage for another hour. Besides, that trunk looked heavy. Victoria hesitated, not accustomed to accepting help from men who weren't family members. In Boston, such an offer might have improper implications. But the West operated by different rules, and Nathan Foster had been nothing but respectful. Thank you, she said finally. That would be most helpful. As they walked back toward the hotel, Victoria asked, Mr. Reed mentioned you're the closest thing to law enforcement Willow Creek has at present. Is that a permanent arrangement? Nathan shook his head. No, just until a new sheriff is appointed. The territory marshal asked me to keep an eye on things meanwhile. Isn't that dangerous? Can be, he admitted. But Willow Creek is generally peaceful. Most trouble comes from drunken cowboys on payday or the occasional drifter looking for easy pickings. And your ranch? Does it suffer while you're playing sheriff? A smile played across his lips. Playing sheriff, am I? You make it sound like a child's game. Victoria blushed. I didn't mean to trivialize your work. I'm simply curious about how you balance these responsibilities. The Rafter F has good men working it, Nathan explained. I built it from nothing over the last 10 years, but now it mostly runs itself day to day. I check in regularly, make the big decisions, help with roundup and branding. Rafter F, Victoria repeated. From your name, Foster, he nodded. Not very creative, but easy to brand on cattle. How large is it? Victoria asked, genuinely interested in understanding this world so different from her Eastern upbringing. 5,000 acres, give or take, about 800 head of cattle. Modest by some standards, but it's all mine, free and clear. There was quiet pride in his voice, and Victoria felt a flash of admiration for what he'd accomplished. In Boston, wealth was often inherited, passed down through generations. Here, Nathan Foster had carved a living from the wilderness through his own efforts. At the hotel, Nathan carried Victoria's trunk with apparent ease, refusing her attempts to help with even the smaller bags. Martha Wilson watched from behind the desk with a knowing smile that made Victoria uncomfortable. What conclusions was the woman drawing from this interaction? I'll have the bill ready when you come down, Martha called as they headed up the stairs. Once they had loaded Victoria's belongings into Nathan's wagon, he offered his hand to help her climb onto the wooden seat. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip secure without being too tight. As they rode through town toward her new home, Victoria was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of soap mingling with leather and horse, the solid breadth of his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as the wagon hit a rut in the road. School typically runs Monday through Friday, Nathan explained as they drove. Most ranch children can only attend during the winter months when farm work is lighter, but town children come year-round. What subjects are expected? Victoria asked, grateful for the practical conversation to distract from her awareness of him. Reading, writing, arithmetic certainly, history, geography if you're inclined, Bible study on Fridays, though that's traditionally led by Reverend Parker. And what level of discipline is acceptable? In Boston, we used the rod sparingly but effectively. Nathan considered this. Western children respond better to earned respect than fear in my experience. That said, a firm hand is sometimes necessary. The council will support your judgment. When they reached the teacher's house, Nathan unloaded her trunk and bags, placing them carefully inside. Is there anything else you need? Firewood is stacked behind the house. The well is shared with the schoolhouse, about 50 paces that way. There's a small vegetable garden that's gone a bit wild, but it could be revived. Victoria surveyed her new domain with satisfaction. I believe I have everything I need for now, thank you. Nathan hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. The women of the town will likely call on you in the coming days. It's their way of welcoming newcomers and assessing them simultaneously. Victoria smiled. I'm familiar with such visits. Boston society operates similarly, if with more pretense. I don't doubt you'll manage them beautifully, Nathan said. He cleared his throat. Miss Thornton, would you permit me to call on you sometime? Perhaps show you more of Willow Creek and its surroundings. The invitation was properly phrased but unmistakably personal. Victoria felt a flutter of something she hadn't expected: interest, certainly, but also caution. She had come to the West for a man who existed only on paper and found herself facing a very real man whose blue eyes watched her with unmistakable admiration. "That would be pleasant, Mr. Foster," she said carefully, "though I should focus on preparing for school in the immediate future." "Of course," he said, replacing his hat. "Perhaps next Sunday after church, a riding tour of the area." "I look forward to it," Victoria said, surprised to realize she meant it. After Nathan left, Victoria began the process of making the small cabin her own. She unpacked her clothes, arranged her few books on the shelf, and swept the wooden floors. As she worked, she thought about Daniel McCormick, the man who had brought her west with his fictional life and heartfelt words. Had any of it been real? Had the man behind the letters felt anything genuine as he'd responded to her earnest missives? Or had it all been calculated deception from the first word? More unsettling was the realization that, despite the fraud, Victoria didn't regret coming west. Had she remained in Boston, she would have continued teaching the daughters of wealthy merchants, living in her parents' home, gradually becoming the spinster aunt to her siblings' children. Here, she had a challenging new position, independence, and the chance to truly make a difference. And there was Nathan Foster, a man as solid and real as the mountains on the horizon. Victoria wasn't ready to examine her feelings toward him too closely. The wound of Daniel McCormick's deception was still fresh, but she couldn't deny there was something compelling about the rancher with the thoughtful blue eyes and quiet strength. As evening approached, Victoria lit the lamps in her new home and prepared a simple meal from supplies Martha Wilson had packed for her. Sitting at her rough wooden table, looking out at the purpling sky over Willow Creek, Victoria felt something she hadn't expected: contentment. Whatever brought her here, right or wrong, true or false, she was where she needed to be. The days that followed were busy with preparation. Victoria cleaned the schoolhouse from floor to rafters, arranged the desks in a more practical configuration, and took inventory of the limited supplies. She created a list for the general store, and was pleased when Mr. Reed told her the town council had approved funds for new primers, slates, and chalk. As Nathan had predicted, the women of Willow Creek began calling on Victoria, bringing welcome gifts of preserves, baked goods, and practical household items. Their curiosity about the new teacher was thinly veiled, their questions probing but not unkind. Victoria answered honestly but selectively, explaining that she had come west for a change after many years of teaching in Boston. If any of the women knew about the McCormick deception, they were tactful enough not to mention it. Dr. Griffin's wife, Caroline, a cheerful woman with apple cheeks and practical wisdom, became a particular friend. "You'll do well here," she told Victoria over tea. "The children need someone like you, educated but not snobbish, refined but not fragile." "I hope I can meet their needs," Victoria replied. "It will be an adjustment teaching such varied ages and backgrounds." "You'll manage," Caroline said confidently. "And you've already made quite an impression on Nathan Foster, which doesn't hurt your standing in town." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Foster has been kind enough to help me get settled. I understand he's an important figure in the community." Caroline's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Nathan's the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, built the Rafter F from nothing after coming west as a boy. Honest as the day is long and not hard on the eyes either." "Mrs. Griffin," Victoria protested, "I barely know the man." "But you'd like to know him better," Caroline observed shrewdly. "Don't worry, dear, your secret's safe with me." After Caroline left, Victoria found herself dwelling on the woman's words. Was her interest in Nathan Foster so transparent? And was it wise to entertain such feelings so soon after her disappointment with Daniel McCormick? Sunday arrived clear and warm. Victoria dressed carefully for church in a pale blue dress that brought out the green of her eyes, pinning her honey brown hair in a style slightly less severe than her teaching coiffure. The small church was nearly full when she arrived, but Mrs. Griffin waved her over to a seat she'd saved. Victoria was aware of whispers and glances as she made her way down the aisle. News of the new teacher had clearly spread through the community. She kept her eyes forward, maintaining the composure that had served her well through years of facing classrooms of rambunctious children. Just as she reached the pew where Caroline waited, Victoria noticed Nathan sitting toward the front, his dark head towering above those around him. As if sensing her presence, he turned, and their eyes met across the church. He smiled, a warm, private smile that sent a flush of pleasure through Victoria. Reverend Parker's sermon was mercifully brief, focusing on the virtue of perseverance through hardship, a theme that resonated with many in the congregation who had faced the challenges of frontier life. After the service, congregants gathered outside to socialize in the warm sunshine. Victoria found herself surrounded by parents eager to meet their children's new teacher. She greeted each one warmly, making mental notes of names and family connections that would prove useful when school began. Throughout these conversations, she was aware of Nathan watching from a distance, speaking with various townsmen but always keeping her in his line of sight. When the crowd around her thinned, he approached, hat in hand. "Good morning, Miss Thornton. I trust you're settling in well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Foster. Everyone has been most welcoming." "I'm glad to hear it." His smile created those appealing dimples again. "Are you still agreeable to a riding tour this afternoon?" "I am, though I should warn you that my riding skills are limited to occasional outings in Boston parks." "I've selected a gentle mare for you," Nathan assured her, "and we needn't go far, just enough to give you a sense of the landscape." "That sounds perfect," Victoria said. "Shall I meet you at the livery stable? I'll come to your house at 2 if that suits you." It did, and at the appointed hour, Victoria was ready in her most practical dress, a sturdy brown that wouldn't show dust. Nathan arrived leading 2 horses, his own black stallion and a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze. "This is Marigold," he said, helping Victoria mount the mare. "She's even-tempered and sure-footed, perfect for a beginner." Victoria settled into the saddle, grateful for the few riding lessons her father had insisted upon years ago. "She's beautiful. Not as spirited as you might prefer eventually, but good for today," Nathan said, swinging easily onto his own mount. "We'll stay at a walk until you're comfortable." They set out at a leisurely pace, following a trail that led away from town toward rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and occasional cottonwoods. The sky stretched endlessly above them, a deeper blue than Victoria had ever seen in the east. "It's so vast," she murmured, taking in the landscape. "That's what struck me when I first came west," Nathan said. "The endless space, the room to breathe and build something of your own." "How old were you?" Victoria asked, recalling Caroline's mention that he'd come west as a boy. 15, Nathan replied. "My father died in the war between the states, and my mother couldn't maintain our small farm in Tennessee. We heard about the Homestead Act and decided to try our luck out west." "We," Victoria prompted. A shadow crossed Nathan's face. "My mother and younger sister. They both died of fever our first winter here. After that, I worked as a ranch hand, saving every penny. By 21, I had enough to stake a small claim. The rest grew from there." Victoria's heart ached for the young boy who had lost everything yet persevered. "I'm sorry about your family." "That must have been terribly difficult." Nathan nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "It was. For a long time, the Rafter F was all I had, all I wanted. Recently, though, I've been thinking there should be more to life than cattle and land." There was something in his tone, a personal note that made Victoria look at him more closely. "What more were you thinking of?" His blue eyes met hers directly. "Family, children, a partnership with someone who shares my vision for the future." The conversation had taken an unexpectedly intimate turn, and Victoria wasn't sure how to respond. Fortunately, at that moment, a jackrabbit darted across their path, causing Marigold to startle slightly. Victoria clutched the saddle horn, and Nathan immediately reached out to steady her, his hand warm on her arm. "Easy," he said, though whether to her or the horse wasn't clear. "You're doing fine." The moment passed, and they continued their ride, the conversation shifting to safer topics: the names of local plants and animals, the history of Willow Creek, the challenges of ranching in the sometimes harsh Arizona climate. As they crested a small rise, Nathan pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. That's the rafter, not as grand as some spreads, but it's home. Victoria could make out a substantial ranch house, a large barn, bunkhouses, and various outbuildings, all nestled in a protected valley with a creek running through it. It looks wonderful, she said sincerely. You've built something remarkable, Mr. Foster. Nathan, he said. Out here, we're beyond the formality of town. I'd be honored if you'd call me by my given name. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. And I'm Victoria. Victoria, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you strong and dignified. They rode for another hour, eventually circling back toward town as the afternoon light began to soften. Victoria found herself relaxing into the rhythm of Marigold's gait, enjoying the gentle sway and the quiet companionship. As they approached her small house, Nathan asked, "Would you consider having dinner with me next Saturday, at the ranch? My housekeeper, Mrs. Hernandez, is an excellent cook, and I'd like to show you the place properly." Victoria knew she should probably decline. In Boston, such an invitation would be considered forward without a chaperone, but Boston was thousands of miles away, and the rules of the frontier were different. "I would like that," she said. "Thank you." Nathan's smile was warm as he helped her dismount, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her effortlessly from the saddle. For a breathless moment, they stood close enough that Victoria could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could feel the solid strength of him. "Until Saturday, then," he said, releasing her and stepping back. "Until Saturday," Victoria echoed, oddly breathless. As she watched him ride away, leading Marigold beside his stallion, Victoria wondered at the swift progression of events. She had come to Willow Creek heartbroken over a man who never existed, only to find herself drawn to a very real man whose life and character were the opposite of fiction's solid, honorable, and genuinely earned. The next day, school began. Victoria arrived early, arranging books and slates, writing a welcome message on the blackboard. Her stomach fluttered with the familiar first-day nerves she'd experienced even in Boston, where she'd known what to expect. The children began arriving in twos and threes, town children walking together, ranch children delivered by parents on horseback or in wagons. By 9 o'clock, 17 students ranging from 6 to 15 years old were seated before her, regarding her with expressions from openly curious to warily suspicious. "Good morning," Victoria said, her teacher's voice automatically projecting to the back of the room. "I am Miss Thornton, and I have the privilege of being your new teacher." For the rest of the day, Victoria assessed her students' abilities, separating them into groups based on reading and mathematics levels. As she had expected, the range was considerable from children who could barely recognize letters to a 14-year-old girl who had read most of Shakespeare's works. By the time the final bell rang, Victoria was exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching had always been her passion, and these frontier children, with their directness and hunger for knowledge, presented an exciting challenge. As the week progressed, Victoria established routines and began to know each child's strengths and weaknesses. There was Johnny Blackburn, a bright 10-year-old who struggled with reading but showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics. Sarah Griffin, the doctor's daughter, whose voracious reading had given her a vocabulary beyond her 12 years. The Wilson twins, 8-year-old boys whose energy was matched only by their mischievous natures. On Wednesday, as Victoria was dismissing the class, she looked up to see Nathan leaning against the doorframe, watching the proceedings with an amused expression. "Mr. Foster," she acknowledged, conscious of the children's curious glances, "what brings you to our schoolhouse?" "Just checking on Willow Creek's newest addition," he replied easily. "How are you finding your students, Miss Thornton? Bright, energetic, and in need of consistent instruction," Victoria said diplomatically, aware of little ears listening. Nathan chuckled. A diplomatic answer. He addressed the lingering children. "Off you go, youngsters. Miss Thornton deserves her rest after managing you all day." The children scattered, though several girls giggled and whispered as they passed Nathan. When they were alone, his expression softened. "You look tired but happy," he observed. "I am both," Victoria admitted, gathering papers from her desk. Teaching has always brought me joy, even when it's challenging. I brought you something, Nathan said, producing a small package from his coat pocket. A classroom necessity that seemed to be missing. Victoria unwrapped the package to find a brass bell, small but with a clear ring when she tested it. "It's perfect," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you." "I noticed you using a spoon against a glass to get their attention," Nathan said with a smile. "Thought this might be more authoritative." Victoria placed the bell on her desk, oddly moved by this simple gift that showed he had been observing her needs. "You're very kind, Mr. Foster." "Nathan," he reminded her gently, "at least when the children aren't present." "Nathan," Victoria corrected herself, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "Are we still on for Saturday?" he asked, his eyes warm with anticipation. "Yes, I'm looking forward to it." And she was, more than she cared to admit. "I'll collect you at 5, Nathan said. "Wear something comfortable for riding. It's about a half hour to the ranch." After he left, Victoria found herself lingering over the small bell, turning it in her hands and thinking about the man who had given it to her. In just over a week, Nathan Foster had become a significant presence in her life, offering practical help, professional support, and increasingly, personal attention that both thrilled and frightened her. Was she being foolish again, allowing her heart to lead where her head should prevail? The pain of Daniel McCormick's deception was still fresh, a constant reminder that words and promises could be empty. Yet everything about Nathan Foster spoke of substance and honesty, from his straightforward manner to the tangible achievements of his ranch and standing in the community. Saturday arrived clear and mild, perfect weather for riding. Victoria chose a practical split skirt she had commissioned in Boston for the journey west, pairing it with a simple blouse and sturdy boots. Her hair she braided and pinned up securely to withstand the ride. Nathan arrived precisely at 5, riding his black stallion and leading Marigold. His appreciative glance at Victoria's practical attire confirmed she had chosen well. "You look ready for a proper Western adventure," he commented as he helped her mount. "Nothing too adventurous, I hope," Victoria replied, settling into the saddle. "I'm still a novice rider." "Just a pleasant journey to dinner," Nathan assured her, "though the view along the way is worth the ride." He wasn't exaggerating. As they followed a different trail than their previous ride, Victoria was treated to magnificent vistas of mountains in the distance, valleys carpeted with wildflowers, and dramatic rock formations catching the late afternoon light. "It's breathtaking," she said as they paused at a particularly spectacular overlook. "This is why I could never leave," Nathan said, his eyes on the landscape. "The East has its charms, but there's a raw beauty here that gets into your blood." Victoria understood what he meant. Though she'd been in Arizona territory less than 2 weeks, she already felt a connection to this wild, open land that contrasted sharply with Boston's ordered streets and cultivated parks. They continued riding, and soon Victoria caught sight of the Rafter F in the valley below. In the golden light of approaching sunset, the ranch looked even more impressive than it had from a distance earlier in the week. As they rode closer, she could see the care that had gone into building and maintaining the property, the solid construction of the main house, the well-maintained fences and outbuildings, the healthy cattle grazing in nearby pastures. Several cowboys tipped their hats as Nathan and Victoria rode into the ranch yard. A young boy ran forward to take their horses, grinning at Nathan with obvious admiration. "Miss Thornton, this is Tommy Jenkins, one of your student's older brothers," Nathan introduced. "Tommy, mind Marigold's tendency to nibble, will you?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Foster," the boy replied, leading the horses toward the barn. The ranch house was larger than Victoria had expected, a 2-story structure built of logs and local stone, with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Inside, it was surprisingly refined, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves of books that immediately caught Victoria's attention. "Mrs. Hernandez," Nathan called, and a plump Mexican woman in her 50s appeared from what Victoria assumed was the kitchen. "Senor Foster," she acknowledged with a nod, then turned curious eyes to Victoria. "This is Miss Thornton, Willow Creek's new teacher," Nathan explained. Miss Thornton, Mrs. Hernandez has kept me fed and the house in order for 8 years now. It's a pleasure to meet you, Victoria said warmly. Mrs. Hernandez nodded, a knowing smile playing about her lips. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, senor. Perhaps you would like to show Miss Thornton the garden while you wait. An excellent suggestion, Nathan agreed. This way, Victoria. He led her through the house and out a back door to a garden that took Victoria's breath away. Carefully tended beds of vegetables and herbs were bordered by flowering plants that filled the evening air with fragrance. Did you create this? Victoria asked, unable to hide her surprise. Nathan chuckled. Mrs. Hernandez is the gardener. I just supply the labor and occasional suggestion. My mother loved gardens, so I've always made sure to have one, even in this harsh climate. Victoria touched a delicate purple blossom. It's lovely, a perfect oasis. Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. That's what I've tried to build here, not just a profitable ranch, but a place of beauty and comfort, a refuge from the harshness that can characterize life out here. You've succeeded admirably, Victoria said sincerely. They wandered through the garden as Nathan pointed out various plants and explained the irrigation system he'd designed to make the garden possible in the arid climate. Victoria found herself impressed not just by the achievement, but by the thought and care behind it. Dinner was served in a dining room dominated by a table that could easily seat 12. Mrs. Hernandez had prepared a feast-tender roast beef, potatoes with herbs from the garden, fresh bread, and vegetables Victoria hadn't tasted since leaving Boston. This is wonderful, she said after the first few bites. Mrs. Hernandez is a treasure, she is, Nathan agreed, and a fierce protector of this household. When I first hired her, she was a widow with a young son. Now Miguel is my foreman and Mrs. Hernandez rules the house like a benevolent empress. The conversation flowed easily as they ate. Nathan asked thoughtful questions about Victoria's first week of teaching, and she found herself sharing stories of the children's progress and challenges. In turn, he spoke of his ranch operations, current challenges with water rights, and his hopes for expanding his herd with better breeding stock. You speak of cattle with the same passion my father reserves for his library, Victoria observed with a smile. Books and cattle both valuable in their way, Nathan replied. Though I admit I'm fond of books as well, you may have noticed my collection. I did, Victoria said. I was surprised by the variety. Long winter evenings leave plenty of time for reading, Nathan explained. And books are windows to worlds beyond these mountains. I order new ones whenever possible from catalogs. After dinner, they moved to the parlor where a fire had been lit against the evening chill. Mrs. Hernandez brought coffee and a berry cobbler that Victoria praised enthusiastically. As the evening progressed, their conversation turned more personal. Nathan spoke of his early struggles establishing the ranch, the loneliness of those first years, and how he'd gradually built not just a successful business but a community of loyal workers and their families. And you? He asked gently. You've heard my story, but you've shared little of yours. What brought you to answer letters from an unknown man in the West? Victoria stiffened slightly, then sighed. If she couldn't be honest with Nathan, she couldn't be honest with anyone. After 6 years of teaching in Boston, I found myself at a crossroads. My younger sister had married, my parents were planning to retire to the countryside, and I faced a future of increasing solitude. When I saw an advertisement in the newspaper Western Rancher seeks correspondence with educated Eastern lady, I was intrigued. And this was McCormick, Nathan asked, his expression serious. Victoria nodded. His first letters were cautious, formal. But as our correspondence continued, he revealed himself, or so I thought, as a thoughtful, well-read man who valued intelligence in a woman. He described his ranch, his hopes for the future, his desire for a partner rather than merely a wife. All things you wanted to hear, Nathan observed without judgment. Yes, Victoria admitted. When he proposed marriage after 6 months of correspondence, it seemed both frightening and right. My parents were horrified, of course. They forbade me to go, which only strengthened my resolve. And now, Nathan asked quietly, do you regret your decision? Victoria considered the question carefully. I regret my naivety, my willingness to believe what I wanted to be true, but I don't regret coming west. Had I not been deceived, I would never have found Willow Creek, never have met the children I'm now teaching, never have. Never have what? Nathan prompted when she trailed off. Victoria met his gaze directly. Never have met you. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Nathan set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the settee. Victoria, he said, his voice low and earnest, I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened. Yes. When you arrived in Willow Creek, word spread quickly about your situation. I heard about it before I met you that a beautiful Eastern lady had come all that way for a man who didn't exist. Victoria winced, embarrassed that her story was apparently common knowledge. I was curious, Nathan continued. Such determination, such courage in a woman willing to leave everything familiar behind. When I saw you that first evening in the hotel dining room, I understood. Understood what? Victoria asked, barely breathing. Why a man might write letters promising anything to bring such a woman west. Nathan's eyes held hers. I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from deception, but I want you to know that while you came all that way for a man who never existed. He took her hand gently in his. You found one who does. The simple declaration stole Victoria's breath. In Nathan's blue eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity, a genuine emotion that contrasted sharply with the hollow promises she'd received in Daniel McCormick's letters. I don't expect anything now, Nathan continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Only that you might allow me to court you properly, to show you that not all men are fiction, that some of us mean what we say and honor our promises. Victoria found her voice at last. I would like that very much. Nathan's smile was radiant. May I kiss you, Victoria, just once to seal this understanding between us? In answer, Victoria leaned forward slightly. Nathan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent as he brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it felt like a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. I should take you home, he said reluctantly. It's getting late, and you have a reputation to protect in town. The ride back to Willow Creek was quiet, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. The night had turned cool, and stars blazed overhead in a display more magnificent than any Victoria had seen in the east. As they reached her small house, Nathan helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. Thank you for a lovely evening, Victoria said, suddenly shy. The first of many, I hope, Nathan replied. He reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand. I want you to have this. Not as any formal token, but as a reminder that I am very much real. Victoria looked down to find a small, carved wooden horse in her palm, the craftsmanship exquisite in its detail. Did you make this? Nathan nodded. Winter evenings provide time for many pursuits. Whittling helps me think. Victoria closed her fingers around the small carving, touched beyond words. I'll treasure it. Good night, Victoria, Nathan said, tipping his hat. I'll see you at church tomorrow. Good night, Nathan, she replied, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away, a solid silhouette against the star-filled sky inside her small house. Victoria placed the wooden horse on her bedside table, a tangible reminder that Nathan Foster was real, his interest in her genuine. As she prepared for bed, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had come west believing in a fiction and found herself embracing a reality far better than anything she could have imagined. The following weeks brought a deepening of Victoria's attachment to both Willow Creek and Nathan Foster. School continued, with the children making steady progress under her guidance. The town began to feel like home, its rhythms and customs becoming familiar. And Nathan courted her with a patient devotion that healed the wounds left by Daniel McCormick's deception. Their courtship followed a pattern that combined Eastern propriety with Western practicality. Nathan called regularly at Victoria's cottage, bringing small gifts books for her classroom, wildflowers from the range, once a kitten from a barn litter that quickly established itself as both household pet and effective mouser. They rode together on weekends, Nathan patiently improving Victoria's horsemanship until she felt comfortable with more than Marigold's placid walk. He showed her hidden valleys where wildflowers grew in profusion, high meadows with views that stretched to the horizon, secret swimming holes in the creek that ran through his property. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the gold and russet colors of autumn, Victoria realized that she had fallen deeply in love with Nathan Foster. It wasn't the romantic fantasy she had built around Daniel McCormick's letters, but something far more substantial, a love based on genuine knowledge of the man's character, his strengths and occasional stubborn faults, his dreams and quiet fears. One crisp Saturday afternoon, they rode to a high ridge overlooking the Rafter F. The valley below was painted in autumn colors, smoke rising from the chimney of the ranch house, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "It's so beautiful," Victoria said, drawing her shawl closer against the breeze. "I never tire of this view," Nathan replied. He seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, as he helped her dismount and spread a blanket on a sheltered spot among the rocks. They sat side by side, Victoria leaning slightly against his solid warmth. For several minutes, they simply enjoyed the view in companionable silence. Then Nathan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Victoria," he began, his voice unusually solemn, "these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted, her heart beginning to race at his serious expression. "When you came to Willow Creek, you were looking for a man who existed only on paper. I know it's been a short time, and I would understand if you need longer, but—" Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I hope you found in me a man worthy of your love, as you have certainly won mine completely." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in gold. "This was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I kept from our Tennessee home. Victoria Thornton, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the beautiful ring to the even more beautiful sincerity in Nathan's eyes. This was no fictional proposal from a man who didn't exist. This was Nathan Foster, solid, honorable, real, offering her his heart and his life. "Yes," she said, her voice catching. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss no longer tentative but full of promise and passion that left Victoria breathless. When they finally broke apart, Nathan pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Victoria. I think I began falling in love with you that first night in the hotel dining room, when you held your chin high despite your disappointment and faced an uncertain future with such courage." "And I love you," Victoria replied. "Not as a romantic fantasy or an escape from my old life, but as the good, honorable man you are." They remained on the ridge until the sun began to set, making plans for their future together. They would marry before Christmas, with Reverend Parker officiating. Victoria would continue teaching until the end of the school year, then decide whether to continue or focus on helping Nathan with the ranch. "I want children," Nathan admitted, his arms secure around her shoulders. "A house full of them, running through the gardens, learning to ride almost before they can walk." "I want that too," Victoria said, surprising herself with the depth of her longing for a family with this man. "Though perhaps we should start with 1 or 2 and see how we manage." Nathan laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. "Always the practical teacher. Very well, we'll approach parenthood as methodically as you approach arithmetic lessons." As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Victoria's heart was full. She had come west following a dream that proved false, but had found a reality far more precious. The ring on her finger caught the last rays of the setting sun, a tangible symbol of promises that would be kept, of a future built on truth rather than fiction. When they reached her cottage, Nathan helped her dismount and then, to her surprise, did the same himself, tying both horses to the hitching post. "I should speak with Reverend Parker tomorrow after church," he said, "but tonight I'd like to celebrate our engagement privately. Mrs. Hernandez sent dinner." He lifted a saddlebag Victoria hadn't noticed. Inside the cottage, they worked together to set the table and light the lamps. "Mrs. Hernandez had packed a cold supper of sliced roast chicken, bread, cheese, and apple pie. Along with a bottle of wine Nathan admitted he'd been saving for a special occasion. As they ate by lamplight, Victoria couldn't stop glancing at her ring, still amazed by the turn her life had taken. If someone had told me 3 months ago that I would be sitting in Arizona territory, engaged to a rancher I'd never heard of, I would have thought them mad. And if someone had told me I'd fall in love with a Boston schoolteacher who came west for another man, I'd have been equally skeptical, Nathan replied with a smile. Yet here we are. Here we are, Victoria echoed, raising her wine glass in a toast. To unexpected journeys and the destinations they lead us to. To finding what you weren't looking for, Nathan added, touching his glass to hers. Later, as they stood at her door saying good night, Nathan's kisses grew more heated, his hands drawing her closer until Victoria could feel the rapid beating of his heart against her own. With obvious reluctance, he finally stepped back. "December can't come soon enough," he murmured, his voice husky. Victoria smiled up at him, her own desire a sweet ache. "Patience, Mr. Foster. Good things come to those who wait." "So they do, Miss Thornton, so they do." He kissed her once more tenderly, then replaced his hat. "Dream of me tonight." "I will," Victoria promised, "as I do every night." The news of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By Monday morning, Victoria's students were buzzing with excitement, the younger ones asking innocently if they should call her Mrs. Foster yet, the older girls sighing romantically over the romance of it all. Caroline Griffin was among the first to call with congratulations. "I knew it from the moment I saw you two together," she declared triumphantly. "Nathan's been waiting for someone like you, educated enough to challenge him, strong enough to handle frontier life, and pretty enough to make his heart race." Victoria blushed at the forthright assessment, but couldn't deny its accuracy. She and Nathan did challenge each other intellectually, sharing books and debating ideas during their evenings together. She had adapted to Western life with surprising ease, learning to manage her small household with limited resources. And the desire that flared between them whenever they were alone suggested the physical aspect of their marriage would be equally satisfying. The wedding was set for December 18th, allowing time for Victoria to write to her family in Boston and receive their response. Their initial letter had been cool, still disapproving of her Western adventure, but the news of her engagement to a successful rancher who was also a respected community leader seemed to thaw their attitudes somewhat. "We are cautiously pleased," her mother wrote, "though we regret that circumstances prevent our attendance at the ceremony. Please convey our regards to Mr. Foster. Your father has taken the liberty of transferring a modest sum to your account as a wedding gift." Victoria read the letter to Nathan as they sat before the fire in her cottage one evening. "It's about as warm as mother gets," she explained. "The financial gift is their way of showing approval without actually saying so." Nathan smiled, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "They're protecting themselves after the McCormick debacle. I can't blame them for that." "I've written describing you in detail," Victoria said. "Perhaps someday they'll venture west to meet you in person." "I'd welcome that," Nathan said sincerely. Family is important, even when they're difficult. As their wedding day approached, Victoria found herself increasingly impatient for their life together to begin. She loved her small cottage and her independence, but she longed for the permanence of sharing Nathan's home, of waking beside him each morning, of building a future together at the Rafter F. The Thursday before their wedding, Victoria dismissed her students for the Christmas holiday, promising to return as Mrs. Foster in the new year. As the last child left, she turned to find Nathan leaning in the doorway, a position that had become familiar over the past months. "Ready for your new life, Miss Thornton?" he asked, his smile warming her as it always did. "More than ready, Mr. Foster," she replied, gathering her books and shawl, "though I admit to some nerves about the ceremony itself." "It will be simple," Nathan assured her as they walked together toward her cottage. "Just us, Reverend Parker, and the town as witnesses. Mrs. Hernandez is planning a feast afterward at the ranch. Victoria nodded, her mind on the night that would follow the feast, her first as Nathan's wife. They had been careful during their courtship, limiting their intimate moments to kisses and embraces that, while increasingly passionate, stopped short of impropriety. Soon there would be no need for such restraint. Nathan seemed to sense her thoughts, his arm tightening around her waist as they walked. 3 more days, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. 3 very long days, Victoria agreed with a smile. Saturday dawned clear and cold, a perfect December day for a wedding. Victoria dressed carefully in the gown she had ordered from Denver cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, more sophisticated than the traditional white that seemed wrong for a bride of 24. Caroline Griffin arrived to help with her hair, arranging it in an elegant style topped with a small hat adorned with silk flowers and a short veil. "You look beautiful," she declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Nathan won't know what hit him." "I hope so," Victoria said, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the proper Boston schoolteacher who had arrived in Willow Creek just 4 months earlier. This woman's eyes held confidence and joy, her posture no longer stiffly correct, but gracefully assured. A knock at the door announced the arrival of their transportation. Mr. Reed had offered his finest buggy to convey Victoria to the church, decorated for the occasion with ribbons and winter greenery. The small church was filled to capacity when Victoria arrived. It seemed that everyone in Willow Creek, and many from the surrounding ranches, had come to witness the marriage of their new teacher to the respected owner of the Rafter F. As Victoria entered on Mr. Griffin's arm, the doctor having offered to give her away in her father's absence, she saw Nathan standing at the altar, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him, in a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His face as he watched her approach was a study in wonder and love that brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Reverend Parker's ceremony was simple but moving. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan's kiss was brief but held a promise that made Victoria blush under her veil. The celebration at the Rafter F lasted well into the evening. The ranch house was filled with townsfolk and ranch hands, all enjoying Mrs. Hernandez's abundant feast and offering good wishes to the newlyweds. Victoria, now officially Mrs. Foster, found herself surrounded by a community that had embraced her as one of their own in remarkably short order. As the party began to wind down, Nathan appeared at Victoria's side, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Ready to say good night to our guests, Mrs. Foster?" he murmured, his breath tickling her ear. Victoria nodded, suddenly shy at the thought of what was to come. They made their rounds, thanking guests for coming, accepting final congratulations and some good-naturedly ribald advice from the older married couples. When the last guest had departed, and Mrs. Hernandez had retired to her room in the servants' wing, Nathan took Victoria's hand and led her upstairs to the master bedroom. The room was large and welcoming, with a massive 4-poster bed, a fireplace where flames danced merrily, and windows that would offer a magnificent view of the mountains in daylight. "Welcome home," Nathan said, his voice husky with emotion. "This is your house now, Victoria, your home." Victoria looked around the room that was to be their sanctuary and felt a rush of belonging. "Our home," she corrected gently. Nathan's smile was tender as he drew her into his arms. "Yes, our home, forever." As his lips found hers, Victoria gave herself completely to the man who had proven himself real in every way that mattered. No longer alone, no longer deceived by empty words, she had found in Nathan Foster the partner she had always hoped for but never truly expected to find. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Nathan's heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. Victoria thought of the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had traveled across the country for a man who existed only on paper, only to find a flesh and blood man whose love was more profound than any fiction could have invented. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Victoria smiled in the firelit darkness. I'm thinking that sometimes the wrong path leads to exactly the right destination. Nathan's arms tightened around her. And I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man in the Arizona territory, because a beautiful, courageous woman from Boston was willing to take a chance on a rough Western rancher. Not so rough, Victoria teased, pressing a kiss to his chest. You quote Shakespeare and carve wooden horses. Only for you, he said, tilting her face up for a kiss that quickly reignited the passion they had just satisfied. Much later, as the fire burned low and the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, Victoria drifted toward sleep in the secure circle of her husband's arms. She had come west seeking love and adventure, following words written by a man who never existed. Instead, she had found both love and adventure with a man whose actions spoke louder than any words, a man who had looked at her disappointment and said, in essence, "You found one who does exist." And Nathan Foster existed in the most wonderful, solid, real way possible, not as a fantasy or a dream, but as a husband who would stand beside her through whatever challenges lay ahead, building a life together in this wild, beautiful land that had become her true home. 5 years later, Victoria stood on the porch of the Rafter F Ranch house, watching as Nathan taught their 4-year-old son James to sit astride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Elizabeth clung to Victoria's skirts, her dark curls and blue eyes a perfect blend of her parents' features. In Victoria's arms, 3-month-old Thomas slept peacefully, untroubled by his siblings' excited voices. The ranch had prospered under Nathan's careful management, expanding to include adjacent properties when they became available. The main house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, though Nathan had been careful to preserve the garden that had first captured Victoria's heart. After 2 years of teaching, Victoria had reluctantly resigned her position when expecting James, though she continued to tutor ranch children and occasionally substituted when needed. Her parents had finally visited from Boston the previous summer, their initial reservations about her Western life dissolving when they saw the happiness she had found with Nathan and the children. "Look, Mama, I'm riding." James called, his small face alight with pride as Nathan led the gentle pony in a circle. "Wonderful, darling," Victoria called back, smiling at Nathan over their son's head. His answering smile held all the love and partnership they had built over the years, a silent communication between two people who knew each other's hearts completely. Later that evening, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet around them, Victoria and Nathan sat on the porch swing, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him in a posture that had become as natural as breathing. "Happy?" Nathan asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Victoria replied honestly, "and you, more than I ever thought possible." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as they had countless times over the years. "When I think about how close we came to never meeting if you hadn't been brave enough to come west on the strength of those letters. Or if you hadn't been bold enough to speak to me that first night in the hotel dining room," Victoria added. "Life turns on such moments," Nathan mused. "One decision, one action that changes everything that follows." Victoria nodded, thinking of the desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Willow Creek, heartbroken to discover she had been deceived. "I never could have imagined this life back then," she said. "It's so much better than anything I dreamed." "That's because it's real," Nathan said softly, "built day by day, moment by moment, between two people who choose each other again and again." As the night deepened around them, Victoria Foster gave silent thanks for the deception that had brought her west, for the disappointment that had led her to true happiness, and most of all, for the man beside her who had looked at a woman deceived by fiction and offered her the solid truth of his love instead. She had indeed come all that way for a man who never existed, but she had found one who did, a man who continued, every day, to prove himself real in all the ways that mattered most.